There is a place in the Horn of Africa where the air is so thin that your breath comes back to you in small white clouds, even in the middle of summer, where the equatorial sun rises over stone cliffs that plunge 1,500 meters straight down into gorges carved by millions of years of volcanic fury and glacial patience, where the morning light turns the high moorland grass to copper, and a wolf with a coat the color of rust moves alone through that light, hunting rodents in the mist, carrying inside its body the weight of almost being gone. Fewer than 500 of these wolves exist on Earth. Think about that for a moment. 500. That is fewer than the number of people in a small neighborhood. It is the rarest wild canid on the planet, and every single one of them lives only here, in the highlands of Ethiopia, above 3,000 meters, in a landscape so extraordinary, so biologically isolated, so unlike anything else in Africa that scientists describe it not as a mountain range, but as a sky island. A world lifted up by volcanic force, cut off from the lowlands below, ancient enough to have developed its own rules, its own animals, its own version of what life can look like when it is given high altitude, deep time, and nowhere else to go. This is not the Africa most people carry in their imagination. There are no savannas here, no vast golden plains, no elephant herds moving through dust. This Africa is cold enough to frost at night on a latitude that sits nearly on the equator. This Africa has giant lobelias growing 5 meters tall, plants so otherworldly they look like columns left behind by a civilization that never existed. This Africa has primates that eat almost exclusively grass, forming gatherings of 1,200 individuals that constitute the largest assembly of non-human primates ever recorded anywhere on Earth. And this Africa has a wolf, thin-legged and impossibly beautiful, that we may very nearly lose within this century if the decisions being made right now go the wrong way. Have you ever stood in a place that felt like it belonged to a different version of the planet? A place where the usual rules of what is possible seemed suspended, where evolution had taken a different path for long enough that the result no longer resembles what you expected. The Ethiopian highlands are that place, and everything alive inside them is alive in a way that reflects how extraordinary the isolation they developed in truly was. Tell me where in the world you are watching this from. Drop it in the comments. I want to know the geography of the people who care about places like this. Now, let us go into the highlands. Ethiopia holds 80% of all the land in Africa above 3,000 meters. That single number reframes the entire continent. The highlands sit at the center of the country like a raised platform, carved by volcanic upheaval that began tens of millions of years ago and shaped the landscape through eruptions, erosion, and the grinding patience of geological time. The Great Rift Valley tears through the country from northeast to southwest, splitting the highlands into two separate massifs, two biological islands effectively cut off from each other by a valley floor, generating different evolutionary pressures on each side over millions of years. To the north, the Simien Mountains rise to 4,533 meters at Ras Dashen, Ethiopia's highest peak and the fourth highest mountain in Africa. Jagged volcanic pinnacles rise from a plateau already higher than most mountains in Europe. Escarpments drop so suddenly into the lowlands that standing at the edge feels less like standing on a mountain and more like standing on the rim of a different world, looking down into somewhere that the air and the biology are entirely different. To the southeast, the Bale Mountains rise to over 4,000 meters on the Saneti Plateau, a vast rolling treeless moorland where you can walk for a day in any direction and see nothing above knee height except the occasional giant lobelia and the occasional pair of golden ears belonging to a wolf moving through the short grass alone. Both massifs are UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Both are classified as biodiversity hotspots. Both are home to animals that exist nowhere else in the world, species so precisely shaped to this specific altitude, this specific cold, this specific isolation, that if the highlands disappear, the animals disappear with them entirely. No other habitat, no backup population, no second chance. The Sky Islands of the Ethiopian highlands represent one of the clearest and most urgent conservation arguments in biology. Some species have only one home, and that home has a fragile ceiling. The Gelada is the primate you have probably never heard of, and the primate that most completely overturns what you think you know about what a monkey can be. It is not technically a baboon, though it is frequently called one. It is the last living member of an ancient genus called Therapithecus, a lineage that was once widespread across the Old World before climate change and competition reduced it to this single surviving species, on a single surviving highland in a single country. The Gelada is, in terms of evolutionary isolation, as remarkable a story as exists anywhere in the primate world. It is the last Therapithecus, the end of a multi-million-year story, still alive, still grazing. It is also, without any close competition, the most terrestrial primate on Earth after humans. Geladas spend 99% of their time on the ground, not in trees, not halfway between. On the ground, seated, moving forward in a slow shuffle gait that carries them across the highland meadows, while their extraordinarily nimble fingers pick individual grass blades and seeds with a speed and precision that has been measured at several hundred movements per minute. 90% of a Gelada's diet is grass. Not fruit, not insects, not roots as a supplement. Grass. Living grass, seeds, and the rhizomes of grass. The Gelada has evolved a digestive system capable of extracting sufficient nutrition from one of the least nutritionally dense food sources available to any primate anywhere on Earth. It has essentially become a grazing animal with hands, a social intelligence, and a face that looks directly back at you. The social life of the Gelada is layered in a way that took researchers years to fully map. The smallest unit is called a one-male unit, a reproductive group consisting of one adult male, between 2 and 10 closely related females, and their young. The females in these groups are bonded in a way that is both social and genetic, often sisters or mothers and daughters, and their relationships form the stable core of Gelada society across generations. The adult male is, in a specific sense, the peripheral partner. He joins a group of females, courts them, maintains access to them, and defends the unit from bachelor males who continuously test the social margins. When he is displaced by a challenger, the females stay. They are the continuous thread of Gelada society. Males come and go, but the female coalitions endure. Multiple one-male units come together to form bands that share a common foraging and sleeping area. And those bands periodically merge into what researchers call superherds. These gatherings have been documented to include up to 1,200 individuals, which constitutes the largest naturally occurring grouping of non-human primates ever recorded anywhere on Earth. When a Gelada superherd moves across the highland plateau, the sound it produces is one of the most distinctive acoustic experiences in African wildlife. A constant layered murmur of hundreds of animals exchanging soft vocalizations simultaneously. A social conversation running continuously across the entire herd. Geladas have at least 27 distinct contact calls, an unusually large vocal repertoire for a non-human primate. Research published in 2012 found that the structural characteristics of Gelada sound production and associated facial expressions share properties with human speech production that are not found in other primates. The Gelada is not speaking in any meaningful sense, but it appears to be using its vocal apparatus in a way that is structurally closer to human speech than any other non-human animal studied in this context. The chest patch is a communication system all its own. Both sexes carry a bare patch of red skin on the chest in an hourglass shape. But in males, during sexual prime, the patch is a vivid, deep red, surrounded by blistered flesh that changes color and texture with hormonal state. As testosterone levels drop with age or loss of social status, the patch fades. In females, the patch blisters and becomes brightly inflamed during estrus. The most visible possible advertisement of reproductive readiness in a species where the animals spend their lives seated close together on the ground, where visual signals are constantly available to every nearby individual. The chest patch is a live broadcast. It tells every Gelada within sight something true about the physiological state of the individual displaying it, continuously without any active effort on the part of the displayer. In a social environment as complex and information-dense as a Gelada band, this kind of passive, honest signaling has enormous value. Moving in the opposite direction, alone on the open plateau in the cold early morning light, low to the ground, nose working the air, is the Ethiopian wolf. Known locally in Amharic as Kai Kebero, the red jackal. It has the long, slender legs of an animal built for extended trotting across open ground, the russet orange coat that gives it its local name, and a narrow, pointed snout designed not for bringing down large prey, but for precise, rapid extraction of small animals from burrows. It weighs between 11 and 19 kilograms and moves with an alert, focused energy, pausing frequently to listen, turning its head to catch sounds made by underground activity. The wolf hunts alone, watching for the mounds of disturbed earth that indicate mole rat activity, then crouching low and approaching with a patience and stillness that looks borrowed from a cat rather than a canid, and then striking with a speed and precision that leaves the mole rat no margin for retreat. The hunting technique is so specific, so precisely calibrated to this one prey animal in this one environment, that it works in no other context. There are fewer than 500 individuals in the world. They are distributed across 7 isolated populations in the Ethiopian highlands, the largest of which is in the Bale Mountains National Park, where somewhere between 200 and 280 individuals hold a precarious existence on the Seneti Plateau. The Simien Mountains support a secondary population of approximately 50 wolves. The other 5 populations are very small, some counting fewer than 25 individuals, each isolated from the others by the agricultural and pastoral land that occupies the lower slopes between the highland massifs. These populations cannot exchange genes without crossing land that is now too disturbed and too human-modified for an animal that requires Afro-alpine habitat to survive. The consequences of that isolation become catastrophic when disease arrives. A rabies outbreak in the late 1980s in the Bale Mountains killed 75 wolves in one section of the park. Canine distemper causes similar mortality when it reaches packs with no prior exposure. These diseases did not originate in the wolves. They came from the domestic dogs kept by farming and pastoral communities throughout Ethiopia's highland villages. Animals that overlap in range with the wolves and carry pathogens that the wolves' immune systems have no established defense against. The Ethiopian Wolf Conservation Program has been vaccinating domestic dogs in the villages surrounding the park since the mid-1990s, treating approximately 5,000 dogs per year in the Bale Mountains area, and in more recent years, vaccinating the wolves themselves. The vaccination program has demonstrably reduced outbreak frequency and severity, but it requires consistent funding, stable logistics, and the sustained cooperation of local communities. All of these requirements are perpetually uncertain in a region under the economic pressures Ethiopia faces. High above the cliff faces where the Geladas sleep, a large bird hangs motionless on the thermals that rise from the escarpment walls. Its wingspan reaches 2 meters. The feathers of its neck and head are stained a vivid orange-red from iron oxide, applied through the bird's deliberate habit of rubbing itself against iron-rich soil and rock, a behavior that gives it a color that has nothing to do with its genetics and everything to do with its daily routine. It is the lammergeyer, also called the bearded vulture, and the object in its talons is a bone. The lammergeyer is the only bird in the world with a diet composed almost entirely of bone marrow. It possesses a stomach acid powerful enough to dissolve bone in a matter of hours. What other scavengers cannot process becomes the lammergeyer's specialty. It has been doing this for so long that the behavior appears fully hardwired, transmitted from parent to offspring across generations in what amounts to a cultural tradition of bone breaking that predates human culture by a margin too large to measure. The Walia Ibex, they exist only in the Simien Mountains. Every individual, every last one, lives on the steep escarpments and cliff faces of the Simien Mountains National Park, concentrated primarily around the areas of Chenek and Bwahit, at altitudes between 2,500 and 4,500 meters. They are a type of wild goat, distinguished by their chestnut-brown coats, the striking white markings on their faces and legs, and the great curved horns of the males which can reach 110 centimeters in length, sweeping backward and outward in a pronounced curve that gives the males a silhouette unlike any other mountain ungulate. The females are smaller and carry shorter horns, but navigate the same impossible terrain with the same unhesitating confidence. The cliff faces where Walia ibex live are not merely a habitat. They are a refuge strategy. Spotted hyenas, leopards, and other large predators cannot navigate the vertical rock faces that the ibex traverse with casual speed, moving along ledges narrower than a human hand with a confidence that comes from hooves specifically evolved for this terrain. They graze on lichens, grasses and shrubs that grow in rock crevices, finding food in places where the geometry of the rock creates small pockets of soil and moisture that most animals would never think to investigate. When the morning light catches the simian escarpment and a line of Walia ibex appears on a ledge halfway up the cliff face, moving with the unhurried confidence of animals that are exactly where nothing else on earth can follow them. The image is one of those visual facts that the highlands produce as regularly as weather. The Walia ibex came very close to disappearing entirely. In the 1960s, estimates placed the total population at approximately 150 individuals. Settlement, road construction, and grazing pressure had pushed the species to the edge of functional extinction. Decades of conservation effort within the Simien Mountains National Park, including management of agricultural encroachment, community engagement, and stricter enforcement of park boundaries, have allowed the population to recover to approximately 500 individuals. A recovery from the edge of extinction that is real and documented. But 500 individuals confined to a single mountain range in a single country is not security. It is a reprieve. The principle of sky island ecology explains why the Ethiopian highlands contain so many species found nowhere else. When a population is separated from its relatives by a barrier it cannot cross, it stops exchanging genes with those relatives. Over thousands of generations, it follows its own evolutionary path, shaped by the specific pressures of its specific environment. Given enough time, it becomes something new. The Ethiopian wolf's ancestors crossed over from Eurasia during the Pleistocene less than 100,000 years ago, when conditions allowed large canids to move across northern Africa. As the lowland climate warmed, the wolves moved up into the cool highlands where rodents were abundant and competition was different. They stayed. And because they stayed, surrounded by ecological barriers on all sides, they became something that exists nowhere else. The Gelada's Therapithecus lineage underwent the same process over a much longer timescale, and the dozens of other highland endemic species that together constitute one of the most unusual assemblages of life on the African continent. The relationship between the Ethiopian wolf and the Gelada adds a layer of complexity to the highland ecological story that behavioral scientists are still working to fully understand. In the Gwasa Community Conservation Area in the Northern Highlands, our researchers observed something unexpected. Ethiopian wolves moving through actively foraging Gelada herds without triggering alarm responses. The Geladas continued feeding. They did not scatter. They did not call the sharp alarm that sends a herd into defensive clustering. The wolves passed through and around the seated, feeding primates, as though the two species had a prior understanding. The wolves, for their part, appeared to use the cover provided by the dense mass of Gelada bodies to approach mole rat burrows from shorter distances than they could achieve in open ground, where their approach would be visible from farther away and the moles would have more warning. The wolves' hunting success rate was observed to be higher when hunting within Gelada herds than in adjacent open ground. The Geladas tolerate the wolves because the wolves pose essentially no predation threat to an animal the size of a Gelada adult. The wolves exploit that tolerance to improve their hunting efficiency. neither species is actively choosing cooperation in any conscious sense. But the behavioral pattern that has emerged from their long shared history on the same plateau is functionally beneficial for the wolf and represents a relationship that could only develop in an ecosystem where both species have been present, interacting and adapting to each other for long enough to arrive at something that looks, from the outside, like a working arrangement. The threats to the Ethiopian highlands and the species that live there are active, measurable and accelerating. Agricultural expansion is the most pervasive. Ethiopia has one of Africa's largest and fastest growing human populations, and the highland plateaus and slopes that form the country's most fertile land are under continuous pressure for expansion of cultivation and livestock grazing. The boundary between the farm and the protected park shifts a little every year in the direction of the park. In Bale, it has been estimated that overgrazing by livestock has degraded approximately 80% of the Afro-alpine grasslands that constitute the core wolf and mole rat habitat. In the Simien Mountains, farming communities have historically lived inside what is technically protected land, and the politics of resettlement and park boundary enforcement are complicated by the reality that these are not wealthy communities being asked to sacrifice land they do not need. They are poor communities being asked to sacrifice their primary productive resource in the interest of animals that most of them have little direct reason to value. Climate change threatens the highland species through the most direct mechanism possible. It removes their habitat by making it too warm. Cold-adapted high-altitude specialists have nowhere warmer to retreat to. They are already at the ceiling. As average temperatures rise and the thermal boundary of viable Afro-alpine habitat shifts upward, the available area contracts. Models for the southern Ethiopian highlands project that under moderate warming scenarios, by the end of this century, large portions of the current Ethiopian wolf habitat will become thermally unsuitable. The wolves cannot adapt quickly enough to match the pace of warming. The plant communities they depend on for the rodent populations they depend on will also shift and contract. The Sky Islands are getting shorter from the top down. Conservation efforts in the Ethiopian highlands are real, ongoing, and in several cases genuinely effective. The Ethiopian Wolf Conservation Program has maintained a continuous presence in the Bale Mountains for 3 decades, combining vaccination, monitoring, community outreach, and research into an integrated approach that has kept the Bale Mountains population from collapsing, despite the disease pressure it has experienced repeatedly. Community conservancies like Gwasa have demonstrated that highland habitats and the species within them can be maintained when the communities surrounding them have a direct economic stake in the outcome, and when the management decisions are made locally rather than by distant authorities who do not live with the consequences. UNESCO World Heritage designation has provided the Simien Mountains with international visibility and access to global conservation funding that would not otherwise exist. These are not cosmetic interventions. They are the structural difference between the presence and the absence of these species at this particular moment in history. The Ethiopian wolf is still here because people decided it was worth the sustained effort of keeping it here. The Walia Ibex recovered from 150 individuals to 500 because people managed the park boundaries and the grazing pressure and the human settlement within the park carefully enough and consistently enough over enough decades that the population had room to grow. Conservation in the Ethiopian highlands is not a story of easy wins. It is a story of difficult, expensive, politically complicated, never-finished work that is the only thing standing between these animals and their disappearance. What the Ethiopian highlands ask of anyone who spends time understanding them is a reorientation of the standard narrative about African wildlife. The story here is not one of open plains and vast migrations and apex predators at the top of long food chains. It is a story of altitude and isolation, of species that survived because they went up and stayed up, that were shaped by cold and thin air and the absence of competition into something entirely their own. The Gelada grazing on the plateau in a group of 1,000. The sound of that many primates conversing in their unusual near speech filling the cold morning air is a scene that has been playing out on these mountains since before our own species was recognizably human. The Ethiopian wolf, moving alone at dawn through frost-silver grass on the Saneti Plateau, pausing to listen for the movement of something underground, is the last representative of a 100,000-year experiment in what happens when a wolf finds a mountain and decides to stay. The lammergeyer banking above the escarpment wall with a bone in its talons, patient and precise, is the last act in a scavenging sequence that ends with nothing wasted. The Walia Ibex standing on a ledge halfway up a 1,500-meter cliff face, looking down at a world it has never needed to enter, is a masterclass in the use of geography as protection. These are not animals on the margin of existence by nature. They are animals at the center of their own world, a world that is high and cold and ancient and biologically irreplaceable. The fact that some of them are also on the margin of existence in the conservation sense, that the wolf numbers fewer than 500, that the ibex held on with 150 individuals before recovery efforts began, is not a reflection of their inherent fragility. It is a reflection of what a century of agricultural expansion, habitat conversion, disease introduction, and climate destabilization does to species with nowhere else to go and no alternative strategy available. The Ethiopian highlands are the roof of Africa. They are also one of the most important and least understood natural laboratories of evolution and conservation biology on the continent. They deserve the same attention, the same funding, the same international visibility, and the same sustained commitment that the more famous wildlife landscapes of East Africa receive, because the animals that live here are not less remarkable than lions and elephants. They are, in many respects, more so. They are the products of a longer isolation, a more complete specialization, and a more precarious existence, and the things they have become in response to what the highlands demanded of them are among the most extraordinary biological achievements on Earth. The mountain Nyala is perhaps the most overlooked of Ethiopia's endemic species, overshadowed in attention by the wolf and the Gelada, but no less extraordinary in what it represents. A large spiral-horned antelope, the mountain Nyala is found only in the highlands of Ethiopia, primarily in the Bale Mountains and the surrounding Arsi and Churcha ranges, with the largest population concentrated in the Bale Mountains National Park. Males carry long spiral horns with a single twist, rising to impressive heights above the head, and carry a rough grey-brown coat that turns almost charcoal in old males. They weigh up to 300 kilograms, making them the largest endemic mammal in Ethiopia. Entire families and bachelor groups move through the heather forests and juniper woodlands of the lower Bale Highlands at elevations between 2,000 and 4,000 meters, feeding on the diverse vegetation of the transitional zone between forest and moorland. The mountain Nyala is listed as endangered on the IUCN Red List, with the global population estimated at around 3,700 individuals, most of them in and around the Bale Mountains. They are large enough to be impressive to look at, elegant in the way of large spiral-horned antelopes, and deeply connected to the specific elevation zone and vegetation community of the Ethiopian highlands, in a way that makes them as much a creature of this place as the wolf or the Gelada. The birding community has long understood that the Ethiopian highlands are one of the world's great endemic bird areas. The broader conservation community is still catching up. The lammergeyer that we watched earlier, carrying its bone above the Simian cliffs, does not nest only in the Ethiopian highlands. But the simian population is among the most studied and most reliably observed lammergeyer populations in Africa, and the conditions of the highlands, the dramatic cliff faces, the abundance of ungulate carcasses, the thermal lift that the escarpments generate, make this one of the best places on Earth to watch the bird's bone-dropping behavior at close range. What the presence of this bird, this wolf, this primate, this ibex, all in the same highland landscape tells you is something important about the process that created them. Each species is a product of a different evolutionary journey that converged on the same mountain system. The Gelada's ancestors were Old World monkeys that found the highland grasslands and became the world's first and only primate grass specialists. The Ethiopian wolf's ancestors were Eurasian canids that found the highland rodents and became the world's most specialized high-altitude carnivore. The Walia ibex's ancestors were mountain goats that found the Simian escarpments and never needed to leave. The lammergeyer's ancestors were vultures that found the bone piles left by the other predators and scavengers, and evolved the only digestive system on Earth that could finish what the others started. They did not arrive here together or develop together in any coordinated sense. They are the products of independent evolutionary trajectories that happen to produce species with overlapping range requirements, and the result of all those trajectories converging on the same highland is the most diverse and unusual assemblage of endemic vertebrates in Africa. The highland morning light has a quality that is particular to this altitude and this latitude. At 3,500 meters in Ethiopia, near the equator, the sun rises fast and climbs steeply. But for the first hour after sunrise, the light comes in low and golden and clear, with a sharpness that is partly a consequence of the thin, dry air, and partly a consequence of the elevation above most of the dust and haze that softens lower altitude African light. In that morning light, the Geladas descending from the cliff faces to the grazing meadows look golden themselves, their manes catching the light, their red chest patches catching the light, the whole column of several hundred animals flowing down the slope in the golden morning air, producing an image that has no equivalent anywhere else on the continent. The Ethiopian wolf moving across the moorland in that same light, its russet coat matching the sun-struck grass almost exactly. The lammergeyer hanging above the cliff edge, still and vast against the blue sky, orange-stained and 2 meters wide, requires no special conditions to be striking. It is always striking. The Walia Ibex on the cliff face in that light, the curves of their great horns against the pale rock, look like something that was painted there by someone who understood exactly what this place needed to look like. One of the less discussed dimensions of the Ethiopian highlands is their role as the birthplace of wild Arabica coffee. The southwestern highlands, specifically the forests of Kaffa and Jimma, and the surrounding areas harbour the genetic ancestors of every cultivated coffee plant on Earth. Wild Coffea arabica grows as an understory shrub in the montane forests of the Ethiopian highlands. And the remarkable diversity of wild coffee genotypes in these forests represents the raw genetic material that coffee breeders draw on when developing varieties with disease resistance or flavour characteristics. The highlands of Ethiopia are the coffee gene bank of the world. This is relevant to conservation not only as a cultural and agricultural fact, but as a practical argument for maintaining highland forest cover. The wild coffee populations that contain the most genetic diversity are found in areas of intact highland forest. And the same deforestation that threatens highland endemic animals also threatens the wild relatives of the crop that generates more than half of Ethiopia's export earnings and sustains the morning routines of a significant fraction of the global human population. Only about 4% of Ethiopia's original highland forests remain, compared to an estimated 40% a century ago. The loss has been catastrophic not only for wildlife habitat, but for the watershed function that the highlands perform for all of northeastern Africa. The Ethiopian highlands are the water tower of the continent. The Blue Nile originates on the Saneti Plateau in the Bale Mountains and carries approximately 80% of the total flow of the Nile River downstream to Sudan and Egypt. The Awash River, the Omo, all of the major rivers that sustain agriculture and human populations across much of northeastern Africa have their headwaters in the Ethiopian highlands. The deforestation and overgrazing that drive species loss on the highlands also degrade the watershed function, increasing erosion, reducing the water-holding capacity of highland soils, and altering the timing and volume of river flows downstream. The conservation case for the Ethiopian highlands is not only biological, it is hydrological, it is agricultural, it is geopolitical in a region where water rights between Ethiopia, Sudan and Egypt are among the most sensitive diplomatic issues on the continent. The highland communities that live closest to the Simien Mountains and Bale Mountains National Parks are not abstractions in the conservation story. They are people who have lived in these highlands, often inside what are now park boundaries, for generations. Their livelihoods depend on the same land that the endemic wildlife requires. Their cattle graze the same Afro-alpine grasslands that the wolves hunt across. Their dogs carry the diseases that threaten the wolves. Their expansion of cultivation upslope reduces the habitat that the Geladas and Ibex need. And yet, these communities are also, increasingly, the people who guide tourists to see the wolves and geladas, who act as park rangers and monitors, who participate in community conservancy governance, and who have begun to see the economic value of a living wolf and a thriving gelada troop in ways that were not available to them a generation ago. The growth of wildlife-based tourism in the Simien Mountains and Bale Mountains has created economic incentives for conservation that complement and sometimes exceed the extractive value of converting the same land to agriculture. A village community that receives a share of park entrance fees and employs its young men and women as guides, and rangers has a direct financial stake in the continued existence of the wolves and geladas that bring the tourists. This is not a perfect solution to the conservation challenges of the highlands. It does not eliminate the pressure from agricultural expansion or the disease risk from domestic dogs or the impact of climate change. But it creates a constituency for conservation within the communities that live closest to the wildlife, and that constituency is, in the long run, more durable than any external protection mechanism. The Ethiopian highlands are not a story of inevitable loss. They are a story of ongoing negotiation between one of the most biologically extraordinary landscapes on Earth and one of the largest and fastest growing human populations on the continent. The negotiation is difficult. The terms are constantly changing. The outcomes are uncertain. But the fact that the Ethiopian wolf still exists, that the Walia Ibex increased from 150 to 500 individuals, that the Gelada still forms superherds of 1,200 on the Saneti Plateau, that the lammergeyer still hangs above the Simien cliffs with bones in its talons, is evidence that the negotiation has not yet been lost. It is also evidence that the work required to keep it from being lost is specific, sustained, and utterly irreplaceable by any abstract commitment or distant good intention. The highlands are asking. The species that live there are asking. What they are asking for is not complicated. They need the habitat they have always lived in to remain intact enough to support them. They need the disease vectors that kill them to be managed. They need the climate to warm no faster than the organisms within the ecosystem can adapt to. They need the communities that live beside them to find the highlands more valuable as a living, functioning wild ecosystem than as converted agricultural land. None of these needs are simple to meet, but none of them are impossible either. The history of the Walia Ibex is proof of what is possible when the necessary work is done and sustained over sufficient time. There is a final thing about the Ethiopian highlands that resists easy description but insists on being said. The altitude changes the quality of silence. At 3,800 meters above sea level on the Saneti Plateau, the atmosphere is thin enough that sounds do not carry the way they do at lower elevations. Wind passes through the giant lobelia rosettes with a sound that is high and thin. The Gelada vocalizations, which would fill a valley at lower altitude, seem contained, as if the thin air cannot hold them as far. The wolf moves through the grass almost soundlessly. The Simien escarpment in the early morning, before the sun has warmed the rock enough to generate thermals, is completely still. Standing at the edge, 1,500 meters of air between you and the gorge floor below. With that stillness all around you and the long view west over the lowlands, you feel something that does not have an obvious name. It is not simply the feeling of height or isolation, though those are part of it. It is the feeling of standing at the edge of something very old and very large, something that has been absorbing the consequences of its own existence for a very long time, and that contains in every animal that moves through it the record of that time. The highlands do not ask for your admiration. They do not need it. They have been here much longer than the category of admiration has existed. What they offer to anyone patient enough to get this high and cold enough to stay is a glimpse of what the world produces when it is given enough time and enough isolation and enough pressure to become precisely and irreversibly itself. If something from the highlands stayed with you, leave it in the comments. Tell me which animal. Tell me which story. These mountains have been developing their answer to the question of what life can be for tens of millions of years, and the more of us who understand what they contain, the better their chance of continuing to ask that question.